The school lasted much longer than the church building. This initially was where you see the granite blocks. That was the original church building.
Yeah.
They raised this around the 1950s. There's a very similar church still in operation on my part of Lowell, back central, St. Anthony's. And it was the same thing. It was built as a one-story church. And so there it is. And obviously, they added the extension and so forth.
54, I think it was at the
Bill,
actual
I
building,
think
so.
the parish was established in 1905.
1904.
But the building, the basement church was only being built around 1917 or so.
17, yeah,
Yes.
17 into
Wasn't-
1918.
Which is the reason that Jack's
Yeah, you're
brother
right.
Gerard was baptized at Saint Jean Baptiste.
That's right. Excellent. Yeah.
Because there wasn't an official baptistry kind of setup. So that's why Gerard was baptized there. That's why
Oh, here it is,
Dr.
yeah.
Sachs, I
I have
believe.
in my notes. This is Suzanne Beebe, by the way.
Yes.
That's our hostess tour guide. Yeah, you're right. 1917, gray granite actual face stone block. This is a little quote here, and from Jack. And it's then the church St. Louis de France, a basement affair with concrete cross, and inside the ancient smooth pews and stained windows and stations of the cross, an altar and special altars for Mary and Joseph, and antique mahogany confessionals, where Gerard had been and kept on going many a time. He liked to go to church. It was where God had his due. Jack, well, when I get to the school building, I mean, this is where, as young children, grades 1 through 4, and so on, this is the interior picture here, and where especially First Communion was the all-important thing. Jack did skip 3rd grade, but he would never skip 2nd grade as a Catholic, because that's the year you made your first Holy Communion, and that was all important. And I made mine back in 1952, and we wore these nice white suits, the girls the white dresses and so forth. And it was really a big preparation. First, again, in the Catholic community, before your first sacrament, there were 7 in the church. Your first, you get baptized. And that was usually as an infant. Second was before communion, you had a confession. And so we're talking about children who are 7 years of age. And say, what kind of sins can someone at 7 commit? Well, it was the usual standard thing about, well, I lied to my mother, I ate a cookie and so forth, and all this kind of stuff. And back in those days, I mean, there were, in the school I went to, the grammar school, which still stands, it's on Gorham Street. It's now a housing place, it's housing. But interestingly, the granite cross is still on top of the building. And it still says St. Peter's School for God and Country. No one has ever said, you got to get rid of this thing and all this. And there were well over 350 students, because we each had 2 first grades, 2 seconds, and so forth. And back in those days, I had Sisters of Charity of Halifax, and they were not women riding brooms who were witches and bitches. I hear some of these stories, some of these nuns that say they were just beating kids up and so on. Well, when I was there, they were very good to a lot of the children. There were a couple of nuns they didn't want to get because they were kind of tough on your marks and so forth. But back in those days too, and it would have been true here for Gerard and Jack, you were marched up to go to confession, whether you wanted to or not. And the deal with confession too, I think, is that you'd get absolution. It didn't mean that you would never lie again. The whole thing was, it was your intention when you making that confession. I will try not to lie again. So I think there's some people enough to say, how could you possibly do that and expect someone at that age to say they're never going to lie again and they're never going to get into a fist fight again, swear and so on. That wasn't. It was that it's the intention. No one. Damn right well that would probably not last too long and so on. So that was the event and so forth. Very important when they turned 7. And I say, Jack, when we get to the school, we'll talk about their time in the classroom and so forth. So this had been closed for some years. But the school, I think the school lasted until, this is 2020, I think it lasted till around 2019.
2020.
Was it? Oh, the COVID year.
COVID year.
Yeah.
So where was it housed? Where was it housed?
The school?
Yeah.
Oh, we're gonna walk
No,
around the
corner.
corner and find out. You're gonna
okay.
see it. Yeah.
Who's this?
This is Father John Lavoisier. This is Père La Lumière from Visions of Girard. So he was the bigwig here. In fact, a lot of the buildings and the construction that were done here were a continuation of the work of the first Father Jacques, who was here. But this man probably has more to do with, well,
Building
the church, the parish hall, renovations were done to the school and the convent, and it is no longer here. I think I said something about this earlier, but there was a rectory right here where he used to live. Jack has the most beautiful poetic description of what he thought were the sacred rites and the rather Gothic looking, undertakings that happened over there. Yeah, so he was absolutely a big deal. If you read any newspaper articles from the early 20th century about the goings on here, he would be in fact the guy who was responsible for most of the goings on. Also, and I just like to point this out if you mind me taking an extra second, this guy performed the most personal of functions for the Kerouac family. Specifically, he was the gentleman who presided over Gerard Kerouac's funeral. So,
in fact, there was a quote here that mentions Father Lumiere. To the other end is the presbytery, which was the rectory, when that's gone. Where Father Père La Lumière, the curé, lives. Another priest, a yellow brick house, awesome to the children as is a kind of chalice in itself. We imagine candle parades in there at night and snow white lace at breakfast. I think
Interestingly, I think the school was the first building to be built in the parish. There was like an interim rectory and an interim little church building because they needed someplace. But as I say,
well, these larger Catholic parishes, they all would usually have 4 buildings. You would have the church itself, you would have the rectory that the priests live, and then you would have, if there was a school, it would be a school building, then you had the convent where the nuns lived.
usually the church gets built first,
Oh, the
and
church
then
is
the school. It was the other way around here because the people here were so eager to have a place for their kids to go to Catholic school.
It was mandated years ago by the Archdiocese of Boston that Catholic parents must send their children to a Catholic school. I mean, there was, a long time ago, there was a kind of a prejudice, especially when the Irish came over here during the famine, against the Irish. And this is what, the mill owners took advantage of them because they said, oh good, these people are so poor, they almost work for nothing. So the wages got lowered. And that caused some real friction among other communities in the city saying, oh, it's the Irish. And they're taking our jobs. Where have we heard that? That old mantra before. So it was kind of mandated. But I know when I went, there was no tuition. It was free. There was enough income coming into the parish so that you could, and the nuns were basically paid nothing anyway. Just basically for their food, the building that they never had to pay for it, and there were many the communities of sisters in the city At one time, there were well over 14 different identifiable orders of nuns in the city of Lowell, the Grey Nuns and Sisters of Charity of Halifax, and so on. And so I was just going to mention the outfits. The ones that I had they didn't quite have the kind of that oval type thing holding in the rest of it, but they all were dressed in black. The only visible part was basically their faces. It was almost as if they were trying to almost like de-womanize in one sense. But that was the garb. It was called their habits. And for the young girls who were in novitiates and so forth, becoming a nun, the day they received the habit was the big day, a big day in their lives. And there were many hundreds. I knew several girls in my class who went off and became nuns, and they would obviously, in most cases, they would join the order who taught them, so they became Sisters of Halifax. But that was pretty standard. You could not show. It must have taken a hell of a long time for these women to really kind of get ready in the morning before they go trooping down the street to the school. But we never saw their hair at all.
And as you can tell, there was a lot of starch
Oh my God, yes.
employed. I mean, just look at that. You know, the amount of starch they had to apply to turn out.
Yeah, and to Bill's point, I actually read somewhere, it was in the first decade of the 20th century, that the diocese contracted with the Sisters of the Assumption out of Nicollet, Quebec. Okay, so they were the ones who actually taught here at St. Louis de France. They were paid, in 1907 I believe it was, $200 per annum. Okay, they made $200 a year. Yeah.
The group.
And it wasn't a hell of a lot more, I'm sure, in the 1950s and so on.
The individual nuns would not have gotten any personal money. It was their order that was getting that.
And they all
Yes.
had what they called the Mother Superior.
Yeah.
She was the boss. That was all there was to it.
Mhm.
And they would always walk in pairs. Where St. Peter's Convent, in fact, it's now a parking lot for the McDonough Funeral Home up on
Highland.
Highland Street.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'm glad you showed up.
Believe it or not,
I live in the
worked
area.
for the McDonough Funeral Home
So
for a couple
but that,
of years.
that got torn down a long time ago. The church got torn down too. So the only thing that's left is basically just the school building. Oh, in the rectory. I think that was a real estate firm there for a while, but the rectory's still standing. And the priests lived in those rectories. They had women who cooked for them and all this stuff like that. So it was, for many, it was a fairly comfortable life and so forth.
They were paid, right?
Oh yeah, but again, I know that there was the pastor at the time that I was there was a guy named Monsignor John J. Twist. He came from a very wealthy Boston family, and usually in these big parishes there'd be 4 other priests there because they had masses upstairs and downstairs in these churches. Again, St. John Baptist Church is a perfect example of that. They would have up and downstairs, so there'd be probably about maybe 8 or 9 or 10 masses in a Sunday morning. So they would have a number of priests to say these masses, and back in those days, it was in Latin. It was unbelievable. I became an altar boy, and I had to memorize and learn the Latin prayers. And in my neighborhood, there were 3 other ethnic parishes. St. Anthony's Church, which is still open. Baxter, it was a very heavily Portuguese parish area. There was the Holy Trinity St. Stanislaus Polish Church, which is still open. The school is closed. And then there was St. Joseph's Lithuanian Church. And sometimes, if I didn't go with my mother to church, I would go to the nearest one, which was the Lithuanian. And the Mass there was said in Lithuanian. And then we'd go with my mother to the Polish church, and there was the Mass. This is the 1950s. This is before Vatican Council. The Mass was in Polish. Then sometimes I'd go off with one of my friends who came from a Portuguese family, go to some Portuguese. And I had the gall to ask Monsignor Swiss one day, how come Mass here isn't in English? I thought that I was a heretic or something like that. So he just said, no, it's always Latin. So you had to memorize, and back in those days too, the priest was not facing the congregation. It was to the back. They would raise the host, the large host, so people knew that this guy was actually doing something up there and so on. That was it. It was, and then the women had to wear tops and a cap. They could not go in. So that someone just carry packages of tissue paper, put it in the head and pin it out. And so, I mean, that's just the way things were back in those days. And in fact, one of the leaders of the Catholic Church back in those days was William Cardinal O'Connell, a guy from Lowell. His statue, or what's left at the top now, was right across the street from the Lowell Library and City Hall. It's called Cardinal O'Connell Parkway, which was supposed to be initially dedicated to James McNeill Whistler. But Whistler didn't want people to know he came from Lowell, even in the United States. So the city said, well, if that's his attitude, forget it. So they dedicated it to Cardinal O'Connell. You can still see a statue thing of McNeill Whistler at the Whistler House. His dad was an engineer to help with the Cole Canal system here in the city of Lowell. Okay, so I think we're done with the church part of it. We'll go over to the school, and then of course we're going to go to, this is a very short tour walk. Because all we're going to do is walk a block up to 34 Beaulieu Street, which in my opinion is the most important of the 10 Kerouac homes that Jack lived in before he got out of high school. There are 4 others here in this neighborhood. 66 West Street, there's 2 on Everett Street. I usually do this in the loop walk, but that's canceled tomorrow because of the weather. And neither Steve Ellington or I are going to do that natural thing of the Lowell loop walk. But to me, 34 Beaulieu, not where he was born in 9 Lupine. And as an added thing, if someone hasn't been, after this is done, if you want to take a walk down to the birthplace home, I'm going to walk down that area myself and show it to you and so forth. But 34 is because that's where Gerard died at age 9, of rheumatic fever. And Jack was only 4. I've always said, we say many times, that the books, my favorite is Visions of Gerard, because it's written about that event. His books are called novels, but they are based on actual events. You know, Big Sur, he was really there. His brother really did die. And Dr. Sachs, and if we do the Ghosts of Pawtuckettville Torch now with Kurt, it talks about his friends who were there and so forth. These are real events and real people, but there's a fiction of a history made around them. Because after all, where he was born, he actually writes about remembering the day he was born. Well, of course, I don't. Wasn't there some French author, well-known, did the same thing? I heard from one of the panel people this year.
I think Hassan Malehi.
He mentioned someone else said the same thing. I don't know if it was Proust or who it might have been, but said he. Well, neither. That's neither here nor there.
Carl Jung came close. He talked about being an infant and being able
Who's
to look
this?
through the lace. Yeah.
Who's this?
Carl Gustav Jung.
Oh,
Psychologist.
really?
Yeah.
All right, we'll just go around the corner to the school building. Keep off the grass. suppose they're gonna keep the St. Louis school sign up there?
I would think that's gonna come down, but they'll keep the stone engraving, I would think.
I hope.
They probably just haven't gotten around to taking it off.
Oh yeah, obviously it's still being refurbished. Jack Kerouac wound up going to St. Joseph's School, and that building is on Merrimack Street. It still stands. It was taken over by a terrific organization called the Coalition for Better Acre. And that coalition started back years ago. In fact, one of the speakers was Charles Gargiulo. Little Canada was basically demolished back in the mid-60s. And Charles and many families just told, out you go. I'm going to do a little Canada tour this coming Saturday from the Lowell Public Library. And there's still some buildings that still exist on it that were never demolished, but it was urban destruction on a grand scale. It's called urban renewal, and it was always in poorer neighborhoods. And it was really a crime that and they would never do those. This day of just bulldozing whole neighborhoods, those days are over. So they went to the school here, and there's a thing from this is again, my favorite book is Visions of Gerard. It's a cold, crisp morning in October. Gerard is going to school with his books and bread and butter and banana lunch and an apple. I watch him going down Beaulieu Street alone. Gangs of kids run around. At the end of Beaulieu Street is a large gravel play yard of the Green Public School, where because the kids weren't Catholic, the nuns have been telling Gerard and Nin and the kids at the St. Louis de France School that they have tails concealed beneath their trousers, which some of us, I for one, seriously believe. At that street, Gerard turns right to go to St. Louis, which is right there along 3 wooden fences of bungalows. First you see the nuns' home. This is the convent building over here. Red brick and bright in the morning sun. Then the gloomy edifice of the schoolhouse itself with its long planked sorrow. Halls and vast basement of urinals and echo calls, and beyond the yard with its special, I never forgot, little inner yard of cinder gravel. When Roger Brunell was doing these tours years ago, we were able to get into the school itself, because this school just closed maybe 2021.
Well, I think it closed in 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
May of 2020.
it survived a long time, and we were able to get in there. And because of that, this room, or these windows there on the first floor out for the, that was where the second grade class was.
Yep.
And there's a story about Gerard. He was he was called a saintly child. He was very, very sick, rheumatic fever, and there's a story about him kind of nodding off and having this vision, and he had several of the Virgin Mary and pulling this little cot, and there's these lambs and so forth. And oh, they're good. This is something new with you this year, isn't it, Kurt?
Well, you know what? It was kind of a little rainy, so I didn't trot them out last year. I was worried about them. But
well, there's the vision
I have
and
these
so forth.
Huge collections of visuals.
And the nun is kind of shaking him up to wake him up a little bit. And he tells his sister, "This is what I had." And of course, she was astounded. Roger talked to the nun that woke him up about that. So it's not just one of these a story thing. Is that the sister?
This is her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Her name was Sister Saint Leo Caddy, her Miss Delia Bork. She was Gerard's teacher on the for the last few months of his public schooling. Right around, just before Christmas, 1925 was his last day of class here. So that story, now how accurately that story is conveyed to us remains to be seen. But we know, in fact, that she was Gerard's teacher because if you take a good close look at the attendance roster for that class, this is Delia Bork. She had 72 students in her class.
Wow.
So 20 to 25 students nowadays in public schools is considered, you know, even the high end of busy. If you go down this list, you will actually find, okay, Gerard Kerouac's name here. Sorry, Gerard Kerouac, okay. 34 Beaulieu Street. Obviously, Bill will have more to say about that when we get over there, Leo. And it's also worth pointing out when we get there, there's this wonderful little vignette in Visions of Gerard about an event that happened at another one of Jack's homes in a slightly different section of Centralville, where he, in fact, Gerard brings this poor little snot-nosed, dirty boy home so his mom can give him some food. It's a parable that Roger used to like to read from. And the name of that young boy is actually right on the list here also, one of the members of the class. He was a member of the Beaupre family. They lived on Lakeview Avenue. 12 kids in that class, in that particular family. So 72 students in Gerard's class, and 12 students, or 12 young people in the Beaupre family. So, yeah, so didn't mean to interrupt any more than that, Bill.
Well, there was on one of, I forget which walk it was. It might have been the Thursday evening walk up Merrimack Street. There was a gentleman on the walk with us, and his father had gone to this school, and he said he was in the very classroom where Gerard was.
Yeah. Well, there's a nun of the order who was a principal here for many years. Her name is Sister Irene Martineau. She's 86 or 87 now. She has moved to a retirement house in Marlborough for sisters, but in her time as principal, her office was right beside the room where Gerard had his vision. And there's no dispute that he had that vision, I think, because...
Well, this man said that his father said he remembers Gerard being kind of shaken out of these reveries or these visions or these dreams he was having. So I was really thrilled to hear that. Well, I mean, first of all, I always say, because you know, if Roger Burnell said this happened, then it happened, because Roger, as a number of people, and Kurt is one of them, they're serious scholars about this kind of stuff.
Roger had the foresight to interview a lot of these people while they were still with us.
Yep.
By the way, you know, one of the nuns that I showed you, she was a member of her religious order and worked for 76 years.
Wow.
Okay, 76 years of service. She was Jack's kindergarten teacher, the one I'm talking about in particular. Roger interviewed all of them, all of the ones who were still alive. So some of the only testimonial we have about that time in Jack's life, you know, what he was like. In fact, all of the nuns, as Roger used to say, said the same thing about Jack. He was very, very bright, but painfully shy. And they didn't notice any particular aptitude for writing in Jack early on. They said he was really more interested in history and geography than anything else. And of course, you can see in Jack's books his fascination with both of those subjects throughout his life. And Bill, I hope you don't mind me taking a second to show this. Guys, when we could get into this building, one of the last times I was able to get in, I think it was around 2010 when Roger did his tour, there was a wonderful principal here at the time named Dr. Linda Truville. And she was all for bringing people in there. Come on in, take a look. Right outside Jack's second grade classroom, and there was another copy of this in the principal's office, was this particular quote, okay, which is part of a biographical profile that Jack wrote. So I don't know if you can read it. It says, "Parochial schools gave me a good early education that made it possible for me to begin writing stories and even one novel at the age of 11. These schools in Lowell, Mass were called St. Louis de France and St. Joseph." Bill's already referred to that. When I got to public schools in college, I was already so far advanced, I set new records for cutting classes in order to go to the library and read all day, or to stay in my room at college and write plays. Evidently, now, I love the fact that the school had this quote up with this second part. Evidently, the progressive education system is wrong, because you only have to learn to read and write, and then you're on your own from the age of 12 or 13 on, from the point of view of higher aims, which can't be taught, only elicited from you by circumstances and influences, not necessarily confined to the classroom. So I think they'd softened a little bit of some of the parochialism here in order to allow that to be up on. But this is literally right outside the second grade classroom that Jack attended while he was here.
When I was in school, the grammar school, I think there were 50 to 60 in each of these classes.
I was in a class of 64 at St. Margaret's School.
And we had
And through the 8th grades that I was there, the lowest it ever dipped, you know, there are always some students that come and go, the lowest it ever got was 58 kids. Wow. And then it went back up to something like 62. Okay. So the classes were huge.
Okay, now look at the size, and if you walk around the side, you can see the size of this building. How many students do you think that they could accommodate in this building?
Quite a few with that many kids packed in.
The day Jack started going to school for St. Louis de France, there were 1,200 students who attended school here. There were so many, in fact, that the diocese actually had to buy or rent another building on Billing Street, which is quite near. Bill normally goes right by there on his kind of final walking tour.
Yeah, the old Billings Street School.
Yeah, the Sacred Heart on Billings. So Jack attended school for the first 2 years, not here, but in this little satellite building, because they simply could not accommodate all of the young people in this area. Roger said one time, and I went and checked, and it turned out he underestimated. He said about 80%, it was actually closer to 85% of the folks in this parish were Franco-American. And you want to know where one of the border lines for like the Franco-American thing stopped? That street right there. Because when you went beyond that street, and I love the fact that the convent's right there, like standing guard over that kind of shit, you had far more Irish families and Polish families. In fact, there's a Polish enclave down here. But Roger said 80, so you look at the rosters, so the repetitions of all of these wonderful, really melodious sounding French Canadian names, I'm like, wow, that's remarkable. I wonder if they even have 10% of this area that's French Canadian anymore. And that extended, by the way, all the way down to the business district, which was almost entirely populated by French Canadian, folks of French Canadian descent. In fact, most of the merchants spoke in French back in Jack's day.
There's still a Polish club down there, Don Polski. This was, again, in my neighborhood too. As I mentioned, there was a fairly sizable Polish community. St. Stanislaus Church or Holy Trinity Church. And about the school thing, when I was there was a nun who had been teaching first grade for over 50 years. And it was amazing because I know that she would have said to some of the children who were kindergartners, to behave themselves, and the first graders rather, to behave themselves. She says, because I taught your father. I taught your grandfather. So you don't smarten up and behave or go tell them. And of course, she had taught those people. I taught for years junior high school, and I said I would never go below, say, the 4th grade. I just didn't have that kind of patience for it. You have to have the gift of that, so at that age and so on. But those classes were very, we had over 800 back in my time. Again, there were 2 classes. It was not just one. There was 2 first grade rooms, 2 second grade, and and it still has. They call St. Louis. So I hope that the developers.
Well, they can't. I don't think they can take that down.
I don't know if this has been. It's on the list of historic buildings in the city of Lowell. I'm not sure about that, but I have a feeling it's going to stay up, because after all I said, they still have it mined. And that was never declared any kind of historic landmark. It's still there. In fact,
Why would you want to take that apart?
I would think structurally, you compromise a lot of the integrity of that. I mean, I think you have to redo a lot of other brickwork. I'm certainly no engineer or designer, but I don't know.
No, if you're going to keep the building, keep the sign.
And nothing with the convent connection, so on.
Be too small for a lot of you to see, and I certainly don't want to pay more than a passing nod to it. But I actually, for each of the various tours, and they're filled with a lot of the pictures you see and tons of archival newspaper articles. But I have been in the process of writing about, filming, mapping, studying places that Jack talks about in his Lowell books. I'm currently at about 150 specific sites that he refers to in his Lowell books. Now, he implies a lot of others, and he disguises some, but explicitly 150 different places. Of all of the people Jack writes about in his novels throughout his entire career, he actually uses over 600 real people as inspirations. 200 of them are Lowellians. So at some point, 6 degrees, you know, right? I mean, you could probably map some kind of connection between a family member, a neighbor, a friend, a former business owner.
Are there any surviving writings of Jack from when he was, say, a teenager, or an older, a tween? Because you mentioned that, what book he wrote at 11?
Yeah, in fact, as part of the archives here I mean, there are archives, Kerouac archives in a few different places, but as part of the archives we have here, we have journals from as far back as 1932.
Wow.
Okay, 1934.
Yeah.
In fact, some of that stuff is really right in my sweet spot, because my favorite of Jack's books is Dr. Sachs. So a lot of that period is what he's talking about, or what he kind of recreates in this really creative fashion. By the way, folks, I did want to take a moment to point this out, and I hope Bill won't mind. Actually, it's this house here. Okay. These white tenement houses. Jack had friends in every single one of the neighborhoods that he grew up in. And those people not only became characters in his books, but sometimes they were an essential lifeline for him. The first of any of Jack's friends, the first one he meets chronologically that appears in any of his Lowell books, is this gentleman. His name is Edward Sorensen. He lived right here with his mill worker family. I wanted to point him out for a couple of reasons. First off, if any of you saw Hassan Malehi's speech yesterday about the kind of cultural kind of nexus that Jack's writing represents, like he had people of all ethnicities and kind of backgrounds, very, very interesting. He identifies this guy as his first English chum. Well, in fact, he came from Danish, German, and Irish extraction. And he married a French-Canadian woman, so he's buried in St. Joseph's Cemetery out in Chelmsford. It's normally one of the places that I like to visit. But what makes him so important, and this is a photograph taken contemporaneous with when he was living here, this is Jack's first playmate that he ever writes about in any of his books. So the first little kid who gets an appearance in Jack. Now, was he his closest friend? Well, no, he only lived here a short time. But bear in mind that it's just a couple of houses down from here, the Visions of Gerard home in which Gerard Kerouac died. Jack needed a playmate. He needed someone to play with, especially during the last months of his brother's life when he was critically ill. He couldn't go outside anymore. He literally was bedbound, or if he went outside, just sat in the sun quietly somewhere. So anyhow, so yeah, the Sorensen family lived here. And this guy, by the way, pretty remarkable, became a public school teacher, but died quite early. And when I talked with his son about a year and a half ago, he told me, he says his father was very, very proud of his service as a paratrooper in World War II, but he was horribly traumatized by his experience of war. And he was already, by the time he was in his 50s, kind of spent physically and mentally, which is a sad comment, but a lot of young men suffered through that. And Jack himself always felt the kind of survivor's guilt that he didn't serve in the same way that his most of his friends did. So Edward Sorensen, I also like him because he was a public school teacher, which was my job for many, many years. So
Kurt,
yeah.
how did Jack get out of not serving in World War II? Because almost most males were drafted.
It's a very good question. Jack actually did enlist in the United States Navy. He was in there for just a couple of months, but Jack absolutely could not take Navy discipline, and he was given an honorable discharge, okay, for basically being mentally unfit to serve in the military. He was diagnosed as having dementia praecox, which basically is schizophrenia. Okay. Well, one day he was out, you know, they were doing marching drills, and Jack decided he was done. He wanted to have a cigarette, and he just put his gun down and he walked off the drill, and the person was like yelling at him. So they threw him in the nut house, they threw him in the brig for a while, and then finally said, in different character, he doesn't want to be in the military. But Jack actually was incredibly proud of and supportive of all of his peers who did serve. In fact, he lost enough of them that years and years later, it's clear he was haunted by the experience of what had happened to a lot of his
Yeah, I
peers.
thought his high school peers some of them were killed in World War II.
Yeah, Sebastian Sampras, Billy Chandler, Jimmy Scondras, you know, a lot of his peers, in fact, didn't make it back, and a couple of them were prisoners of war under some of the most god-awful circumstances. In fact, one of Jack's buddies was a prisoner of war, survived the Bataan Death March. He was in prison for 3 years, over 3 years, okay, in a Japanese, basically a prisoner of war camp, and somehow survived. So, hey,
This is it. This is 30. What?
you got the solar, that's brand new from last year. They got solar panels up there now.
Where? Yeah, but this is the house. 34 Bolia.
Well, I know, but I'm just
Oh.
looking at the solar panels going, that's an improvement. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk about something else. Yeah,
So this is
the
34 Bolia Street, and as I said,
It's a little
this is the most important home of the 10 childhood homes.
Kerouac.
Or young adult before we got to Lowell High School, because this is where Gerard died, and he was only 9 years of age. He suffered for years, his whole young life from rheumatic fever, and Jack is only 4. Now back in those days, and it wasn't that uncommon, Gerard was actually waked here, not in the church, not in the funeral parlor. The funeral parlor industry wasn't quite there, because Gerard died on June 2nd, 1926, and so he was waked in the front parlor. So the priest would come over, they'd say their prayers, the rosaries, the Hail Marys, the Our Fathers, Glory Bees, and the nuns. So, and he was there awake for 2 nights, and that's an amazing thing. When you're only 4 years of age, no wonder. And because I know that some say, well, his books are all about death. Well, it's a recurring theme, because if you think about that, if you're 4 and your older brother, who's referred to as saintly, dies and is being waked in the very home that you're sleeping in, this is where you're living, that leaves quite an impact. Say his friend Sammy died in World War II, and so death is the thing that haunts. This is why, in fact, I think when Jack was writing Visions of Gerard, he was heavy into his Buddhist phase. So it was a way of him trying to help reconcile the pain and sorrow and suffering that we experience here in life, as well as the pleasures and joys. And I think as a Catholic too, that was something he would have understood very well, because about the afterlife, the suffering of Christ on the cross, the dying for the redemption of people and their sin and so on. So it wouldn't have been a thing that was terrifically frightening to him as such. I mean, obviously at 4, you get older, and you make your first communion and say, okay, there's a balance there. This is from, And in the Visions book, they're referred to as the Dulawas, not Kerouac. And I do like the three, Dulawas, not Dulas, but is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
When people say Deleuze, I was like,
Oh.
no, Kerouac was very, very precise when he actually translated names from one name to another, and he did that. He wanted to use the original names, but his publisher early on said, you're going to be hit with libel suits, don't do it. So he renames everyone. So Kerouac, Duluwas. He has the same distribution of syllables. You get long and short vowels. So somebody did ask me, so well, where did the name Duluwas come from? I said, I have absolutely no idea, but it is the name that he gives his family more
I have
often than any
the
other.
list. You know, Gerard Duluwas is Francis Gerard Kerouac, Jackie Duluwas, Jean-Louis Jack Kerouac, Nin Duluwas. So the names are here. This is from the book. Christmas Eve of 1925, Teen Nin, his sister, and I gaily rushed out with our sleds to a new snow layer on Beaulieu Street, forgetting our brother and his sack, though it was he who sent us out with the injunction to play good and slide far. Look at the pretty snow outside, go play, he cried like a kindly mother. And we bundled up and went out. I still remember the quality of that sky, even though I was only 3 years old. Over the roof was that blue, magic Lowell blue, that keen winter northern knife blade blue of winter dust so unforgettable, perfect for the silhouetting presentations of church steeples and of rooftops and of whole Lowell. These mighty skies bending over Lowell and over Gerard as he lay knowing on his deathbed, rosary in his hands, pans on papers by the bed, pillows under his feet. Outside is December's big parley with night and it's Christmas Eve, and his heart breaks to realize it will be his last Christmas on our innocent, mistaken earth. I don't remember how Gerard died, but in my memory, which is limited and mundane, here I am running pell-mell out of the house at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and down the sidewalk of Beaulieu Street, yelling to my father, whom I've seen coming around the corner, woeful and slow with straw hat and coat over arms in the summer heat. Gleefully I'm yelling, Gerard est mort. Gerard is dead, as though it were some great event that would make a change, that would make everything better, which it actually was, which granted it, but I thought it had something to do with some holy transformation that would make him greater and more Gerard-like. He would reappear following his death, so huge, powerful, and renewed. That's some pretty powerful writing. And of course, it's a great testament to the very short life of his brother. So, I mean, it's tremendous. Other than that, if Jack hadn't written about these things and so forth, we would never have known about this young boy who died so young. And there's another, it's also in the book about the cat. You want to tell that story about the cat?
Oh yeah. One of my absolute favorite moments on any tour, when Roger Brunel, who, you know, by the way, grew up, you know, had a home not too very far. He was a Centralville guy through and through. But when he did this tour, I love the fact Roger was always dressed up for church because his tour was on Sunday morning. And Roger would stand right in the middle of the street and he'd just read with that absolutely irreplaceable accent, but this beautiful parable about the cat and the mouse from Visions of Gerard. And if you've never read the book, the basic story is Gerard Kerouac, by the way, this is a photograph, or a repainted version of a photograph of him taken probably about 6 months, 9 months before he died. One day, he had gone down to the main business area in Centralville. There was a shop run by one of Leo Kerouac's good friends. And he'd gone in there one day and was on his way home and he discovered a little mouse caught in a trap. and it was struggling, and it was trying to drag itself to the, I mean, it's this horrible, pitiable thing. So Gerard Kerouac was so overwrought by this, he picked up this little, put it like in a little handkerchief, put it in his pocket. He brought it home. He made a little box in the house. He told his mother, I have to feed it. We have to nurse it back to health. I mean, it's just so powerful. He went to school the next day, came back home to check on his little mouse, and the family cat had eaten it. So the most angry Jack ever describes his brother being was when he picked up the kitty and he looked in his face. He said, bad kitty, we don't do that to little things, you know. And again, it becomes this kind of family myth. Well, Roger's in the process of reading this passage from Visions of Gerard, explaining the cat and Gerard scolding the cat. A cat comes walking down the sidewalk here, about the driveway. And Roger was standing probably about here, looking in this direction, and the cat walked right behind him and just posed. Just sat there looking at everyone as if it was wondering what was going on. And everybody looked at the cat and they were trying to figure out, was this choreographed to happen this way? What is this about? And as soon as Roger finished reading the passage, it just got up, walked across the street, on cue. You couldn't have found it, and I really wish you'd been here recording that day. That'd be one of those events to have. But Roger at one point, I think, he was a little, miffed. He's like, what is everyone paying attention to? And when he noticed it was the cat, I think he was like, Roger, who had a certain theatrical flair.
How dare another living being share the spotlight with Roger Brunel?
Yeah. So,
isn't there some kind of a connection now when he was a lookout on the top of the mountain? There's a fire, a lookout. And he was starving, and there was another mouse. It was a mouse in there, and refused to kill the mouse or something. There was some. I heard that there was some reference about that, and I always thought maybe it's because of this story about his brother and the poor mouse that got eaten by the cat.
In one of Jack's later books, I mean, again, there are the Lowell books, then there are the big books like On the Road and Dharma Bums and Desolation Angels is another of my favorite. But Jack describes an experience when he was 7,000 feet up in the air on Desolation Peak. He had mice that would try to get into his limited food stores. And one day he got kind of angry. Jack, by the way, was going through alcoholic withdrawal. He had no cigarettes. I mean, he was really physically struggling. He spent almost 70 days alone on top of this mountain. So his food stores became sacred to him. Well, one day he actually caught a little mouse, had it torn through like a little package of pea soup. And Jack got so angry he actually went after it with a stick and he killed it. Now, killed a mouse, most people would consider an annoyance, vermin, but it immediately brought him right back here. He made that connection in his mind because Jack was never, ever, ever far from Lowell. I don't care where he was always in Lowell. He saw echoes and haunted reflections of Lowell in all of the places he was in. And we're not just talking when he was in San Francisco or Denver or New York. When he was in Morocco, when he was in Mexico, when he was in England, he saw Lowell everywhere. So he all of a sudden is like, oh my God, what kind of a beast have I become? What have I been reduced to? Because he remembered the lesson of his good brother who tried to rescue the little mouse. And by the way, when Leo Kerouac got home that day and explained to Gerard, this is the way things go. Cats eat mice because mice eat our grain. He said, you don't throw your bread on the floor, at dinner, and they eat our grain. It's all part of the same thing. And he's like, I want to be somewhere better than this, okay? Which is one of the justifications Jack had for saying, Gerard knew he was going to die. He accepted he was going to die, and he had this equanimity, this kind of beatific quality about him that for Jack was the perfect fusion. And again, you want to read a book that's deeply, painfully Catholic of all Jack's books, Visions of Gerard, but you want to read a book that actually probably is equally, and very insightfully Buddhist, Visions of Gerard. One reviewer described the book as a stereoscopic vision of Gerard Kerouac. of Jack's brother, because it sees him through these two lenses simultaneously, and it's also an act of memory work. So it's about past and it's about present, and yeah, so it's just it's this wonderful, wonderful fusion of all of these things that Jack already was thinking. Now he had a new language to talk about them in, and so he writes this book. And by the way, this is just Jack and his sister, basically the age he would have been at the time he was living in this home.
One practical fact, when we were over there looking at the elementary school, we did not mention that this brick building was the girls' high school for the parish. It was in, I'm not sure whether it was Father Labossiere, but one of the pastors decided that the girls of the parish should have a finishing education so that they wouldn't necessarily have to go work in the mills. And that was somewhat unusual thought for, you know, the girls' future being considered. So this was the high school. The girls who went here are deeply attached to it. There is a Facebook page of the graduates of St. Louis Academy where they share memories, news, you know, whatever. So, you know, like the boys, if they wanted to go to a Catholic high school, would have walked down to St. Joseph's on Merrimack Street, you know, because there was no high school built for them in the parish borders.
And you were absolutely right. It was Father Lavoisier who made that decision. Hey guys, you know, if we're at the end of the tour, just one, and this is the kind of stuff I love because it's like you can't make it up. And Gerard Kerouac died at about 11:45 p.m., so he died fairly late at night on June 2nd, 1926. He was taken by Napoleon Villano, saw his funeral home across the river. His body was processed over there, was brought back home fairly quickly the next day. Body spent almost 2 days, you know, here in the home. Family from all over came in for the wake. The front parlor right there, as much as Roger was ever able to determine, but if you see the wreath on the front door, but those windows, okay, right there, you know, not the porch, but the windows right behind it, is actually where the coffin would have been kept. But this is a historical, you can't make this kind of stuff up. Gerard Kerouac died at about 11:45. 4 hours after Gerard Kerouac died, a young man named Allen Ginsberg was born in Newark, New Jersey. Get in your car, if you're so interested, drive from Lowell to Newark, New Jersey. Do you know how long it takes you to get there from here? About 4 hours, the same exact amount of time chronologically after Gerard's death that Allen Ginsberg was born. So when Jack had these intense, and I mean intense, kind of metaphorical linkages between his brother and all of the kind of surrogate brothers he would have, Neil Cassidy, Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, it's for reasons like that. So, and by the way, Neil Cassidy was born just a few months before Gerard Kerouac died, also in 1926. So you gotta love that sort of thing. So,
well, this concludes. This is one of the shorter walks and tours. So I want to thank you for being here because I am freezing my ass off. I can't stand. No, seriously, I can't. I hate cold weather. I've been wearing a scarf for this whole thing since Wednesday, I think. I want to thank Suzanne, and I want to thank
Anybody inspired to contribute?
Oh yeah, if you, but don't
Whoa.
feel any pressure because don't worry. If you can, you can. And also Kurt, for a lot of we didn't have this a couple of years ago. These photographs and you know this real research which you're still doing. So
ongoing.
We hope if we
Thank
can
you
get
very
it in tonight, the Ghost of Pawtuckaville walk. What time is that supposed to be?
It's scheduled. I think it says it's scheduled at 5. You're going to leave the Worthen at 5, and
Right.
then you're gonna hoof it down there. I'll be waiting for you out at Southwick, but I think it says it's going to take like 15 minutes.
Yeah.
By the way, you want to know one other really, really weird thing? Just a couple of houses down here from the Girard's house is where the Willett family used to live. Reginald Willett was the guy who actually used to do all the early tours with Roger. They were actually the inventors of the walking tours for LCK. So he's like, oh yeah, I remember. He said, actually, he was old enough that he remembered Girard. He said, none of us thought he was particularly special at all. He was just a very average little boy in the neighborhood. Yeah. But one thing that was outstanding about him was how incredibly fussy Gabrielle Kerouac was about his care. Like, you know, don't run, don't overexert your heart. Because, by the way, and this is not something that's generally known, Gerard Kerouac had rheumatic fever, okay, which badly damaged his heart. He didn't die of rheumatic fever. He died of something called purpura hemorrhagica, okay, which basically means he bled out internally because he had such severe inflammation of all the membranes in the interior of his heart. Incredibly painful, slow, agonizing way to die. And as far as we've been able to determine, Jack Kerouac shared a room with Gerard Kerouac. So if he was in the same room with him as this little boy was basically going through a months-long death throes, okay, Jack might not remember it consciously, but you'd have to think that when he woke up in the middle of the night and he heard his brother muttering prayers like, God, why? And I mean, there are descriptions and visions of Gerard of him saying, God, I've done everything. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you making me hurt so much? The stabbing pains in his body are just like absolutely terribly awful. And I think Jack developed an experience for, and I guess a tolerance of mortality and death and suffering at a very early age. So when he gravitated to the first of Buddha's Four Noble Truths, that all life is supposedly suffering, okay, he had some pretty potent examples from his earliest conscious memories to draw from.
It's fitting that he was writing this book while he was the so-called Buddhist phase. So that was a way of kind of dealing with this. Now I'm going to take a walk down to 9 Lupine, the 7-9 Lupine. So if someone wants to come to take a hike down there, haven't been there, I would have done this on the loop walk tomorrow, but that's not going to happen. It looks still pretty severe as far as the weather goes. So I'm heading down there. So if anybody wants to do that, and then I'm going to take a stop at the world famous Top Donut Shop. No offense to the Dunkin' Donuts.